All right, welcome back everyone for another deep dive. And this time we're getting into a story. Um, it's a wild one, a real thriller with hacking and crypto and just a mind-blowing spending spree. So
It's really straight out of Hollywood.
it is. It is. And at the center of it all is this guy, Malone Lam. He's just 20 years old, and he managed to pull off one of the biggest cryptocurrency heists in U.S. history from an individual.
And what's fascinating about this case is it wasn't just some, opportunistic crime. It was meticulously planned. I mean, we're talking weeks of preparation, a depth understanding of how to manipulate people, and an exploitation of trust in ways you wouldn't believe.
Yeah, that's what really got me about this story, and we've got a lot to unpack here. We've got a great article from CNA that details Lamb's journey, and a YouTube video by Kaser which breaks it all down visually, and even a random podcast intro that somehow ties into all of this.
It is a lot to cover, but I think it's best to start by understanding just how these scammers were able to even orchestrate this in the first place, like the technical side of it.
Yeah, let's get into that. So how did they even begin? Who was their target?
Well, their target was a high net worth individual, someone who had been involved in crypto from the early days, and imagine getting just bombarded with these fake Google account access notifications, like, someone's trying to break into your account.
Oh my God, that's already unsettling.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what Lam and his accomplice, Jeandiel Serrano, did a week before the actual heist.
So they were setting him up, priming him to be scared and confused when they actually made their move.
Exactly. And it gets even more devious because they used VPNs and proxies, which are tools that mask your location, and they made these access attempts look like they were coming from all over the world.
So it looks like this huge global threat, like he's being targeted by some massive organization.
Precisely. They're playing on his fear, making him feel incredibly vulnerable, and it worked.
It's just so manipulative.
Oh, absolutely. And they didn't stop there. On the day of the heist, they called him posing as Google support, claiming there was a hacking attempt and offering to help secure his account.
Oh God, so they're preying on his trust in authority figures.
Exactly. It's classic social engineering. They knew people tend to trust these big tech companies, especially when it comes to online security.
And I bet he was so relieved to have someone to help him.
Oh, for sure. And they used that to their advantage. They convinced him to give them his security codes, and that gave them access to his OneDrive and his Gmail accounts.
And that's where they found records from the Gemini cryptocurrency exchange.
Bingo! And wouldn't you know, they call him back this time pretending to be Gemini security, just hammering home the idea that his entire digital world is under attack.
They were really laying it on thick.
Oh, yeah. And they even got him to transfer about $3 million in crypto to a wallet they controlled just as a test,
Wait, so he willingly sent them money?
Well, he thought he was transferring it to a secure account under their guidance, but it was all a setup. It's just audacious, really.
And it gets even crazier because then they convinced him to download a remote desktop connection program, right?
Yeah, essentially giving them complete access to his computer, like handing over the keys to your vault.
So at this point, they have complete control over his digital life.
Pretty much, and this is where the story takes a wild turn. While Serrano kept the victim distracted, Lam used those access keys to transfer over 4,100 Bitcoin to their control.
4,100 Bitcoin. That's got to be an insane amount of money.
It was over $230 million at the time.
230 million.
Just like that. Just like that. And what's striking is the reaction. They're celebrating online using these ridiculous usernames like Dollar and Anne Hathaway.
Anne Hathaway. Seriously.
It's this bizarre mix of calculated criminal activity and just almost childish glee.
And this heist was just the beginning, right? I mean, they had to cover their tracks somehow.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Immediately they started laundering the money. They used a technique called a peel chain, which is essentially breaking the stolen Bitcoin into smaller amounts and moving them across multiple exchanges.
So it's like trying to follow a trail of breadcrumbs that's constantly splitting and disappearing.
Exactly. They were trying to make the money trail impossible to follow.
Well, they were sophisticated enough to pull off the heist and cover their tracks, at least initially. But that's what makes this case so compelling, right? It's a reminder that we're not dealing with petty thieves anymore.
Oh, no, not at all. This is a whole new breed of cybercriminal with a deep understanding of technology and psychology and the financial system.
And that begs the question, if they were so good at covering their tracks, how did they eventually get caught?
Well, that's where things get even more interesting. While most of the group tried to stay under the radar, Malone Lam decided to celebrate his newfound wealth in a way that would ultimately lead to his downfall.
Let me guess, he went on a shopping spree.
Oh, that's putting it mildly. Lam transformed from an average 20-year-old into a high-rolling, big-spending nightclub aficionado. But that's a story for part 2 of this deep dive.
All right, we'll have to wait for that. Then we'll uncover how Lam's extravagant lifestyle ultimately led to his capture in the park. Explore the fascinating world of blockchain analysis and delve into the ethical complexities of recovering stolen crypto assets.
It's going to be a wild ride.
You won't want to miss it.
So Malone Lam, he's sitting on millions in stolen Bitcoin, right? Ready to start living the high life.
And high life he did. It's almost unbelievable the kind of spending spree he went on.
He really dove headfirst into that LA nightclub scene, dropping hundreds of thousands of dollars a night like it was nothing.
Hundreds of thousands. Seriously, what kind of numbers are we talking?
See, easy. 265,000 one night, 300,000 another. There was one night where he spent over $500,000.
That's more than most people make in a lifetime.
Yeah, and he wasn't just spending it on himself. He was tipping DJs with like $60,000 bottles of champagne, showering random people in the club with gifts.
So he goes from this mastermind hacker to a big spender trying to make a splash. It's like a complete 180.
It is, and you have to wonder what was going through his head. Was it a need for validation? Did he want to prove he'd made it? Or was he just incredibly naive about the consequences?
I mean, it's hard to imagine feeling comfortable flaunting that much wealth knowing it was stolen.
Right. Maybe he thought he was untouchable. Or maybe he just didn't think that far ahead. But whatever the reason, his spending was definitely not low-key.
And you mentioned blockchain analysis earlier. Did that play a role in how investigators caught up with them?
Oh, absolutely. Blockchain analysis is like a digital detective,
Yeah.
It can meticulously piece together a financial puzzle.
But isn't cryptocurrency supposed to be anonymous? How does blockchain analysis work if the transactions are hidden?
Well, that's a common misconception. People think that crypto is completely anonymous, but while individuals might use pseudonyms or try to hide their identity, every transaction is still recorded on the blockchain.
So it's like a public ledger that anyone could access.
Exactly. It's permanent and it's transparent. And blockchain analysis lets investigators follow the money trail.
Even if the person using the cryptocurrency is trying to hide their identity.
Yep. They can use sophisticated software to analyze tons of data, looking for patterns and connections that link transactions to specific individuals.
So in Lam's case, they were able to connect his crazy spending back to the story.
Precisely. They use techniques like clustering analysis, which groups together addresses that are likely controlled by the same person.
So even if he was moving the Bitcoin between different wallets, they could still track it.
Yeah. And then there's taint analysis, which traces the flow of funds from a known source, like the victim's wallet.
So they could see the stolen Bitcoin moving from the victim's wallet to wallets controlled by Lam, and then being used to buy all this stuff.
That's right. It really shows how even technology that's meant to provide privacy can be used to uncover criminal activity.
It's almost poetic justice, in a way.
You could say that. But it also shows how law enforcement is adapting to these new challenges. They're developing the tools and the expertise to investigate cybercrime in this new world of cryptocurrency.
So it wasn't just Lam's spending that led to his downfall. It was the digital trail he left behind.
Exactly. And his accomplices made some mistakes, too, that helped the investigation.
Mistakes? Like what?
Well, one of them accidentally revealed his full name during a screen recording, and another reused deposit addresses, which made it really easy to trace the flow of funds.
So a combination of carelessness and underestimating the power of blockchain analysis.
Pretty much. And in the end, the net closed and Serrano was arrested at LAX, coming back from a vacation in the Maldives, and Lam was caught in his Miami mansion surrounded by all his ill-gotten gains.
Quite a fall from grace. So what happens next? What about the stolen Bitcoin? Can the victim ever get it back?
Well, that's where things get a bit more complicated. Recovering stolen crypto assets is a tricky process. It depends on how quickly law enforcement acts, the sophistication of the criminals, and the nature of the assets themselves.
So it's not as simple as just seizing a bank account.
Not at all. Cryptocurrency is decentralized, It exists on this global network of computers. It's not controlled by any single entity, which makes recovering stolen funds much harder.
But in Lam's case, they were able to seize some of his assets, right? Like the cars, the clothes, the mansion, all that stuff was bought with stolen Bitcoin.
That's right. And that brings us to the concept of asset forfeiture. When authorities seize assets that were bought with stolen funds, they can auction them off and use the money to compensate the victim.
So in this case, they'll sell off Lam's Lamborghinis, his Rolexes, and try to recover as much of the victim's losses as possible.
Exactly. But what about the money Lam spent on experiences, like the nightclubs, the private jets, the champagne? That's all gone right.
That's a good point. You can't really seize a night out at the club.
Nope. And unfortunately, in many cases, that money is just gone. While they can seize physical assets, recovering funds spent on services or experiences is incredibly difficult.
So there's a good chance that a big chunk of that stolen Bitcoin is gone forever.
It is a sobering thought, and it really highlights the importance of understanding the risks of the crypto world.
Absolutely. It's not all sunshine and rainbows.
Yeah,
There are real dangers, and you have to be smart about protecting yourself.
for sure. And this case is so much more than just a story about a heist and a spending spree. It raises these big questions about the future of cryptocurrency, the challenges of cybercrime, and the ethical complexities of a world where digital assets can be stolen and recovered in ways we never imagined.
Yeah, it's mind-blowing when you think about it. And speaking of ethical complexities, there's another aspect of this case that I think is worth exploring.
You're talking about the model who received that Birkin bag from Lam.
Exactly. She was gifted this incredibly expensive item that was bought with stolen money.
Right, and it raises the question, is it ethical to benefit from stolen goods even if you don't know where they came from?
Especially when you consider that she was posting about it on social media, almost bragging about it.
Yeah, it's a tough one. On one hand, you could say she was an innocent beneficiary. She had no idea about the criminal activity. But on the other hand, the bag was bought with stolen funds, and her flaunting it could be seen as indirectly benefiting from that crime.
It's almost like a modern-day version of finding a wallet on the street. You keep the money or try to return it. But in the digital age, those lines can get even more blurry.
Absolutely. We're constantly interacting with people and transactions online, often without knowing much about their backgrounds or their intentions.
It really highlights the need for more transparency and accountability in the digital world.
I agree. As we move towards this more decentralized financial system, we need to have better ways to trace assets and make sure that people aren't unknowingly benefiting from criminal activity.
This case has really opened my eyes to the ethical challenges of the digital age. It's not just about protecting ourselves from scams. It's about developing a more mindful and responsible approach to our online interactions.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Right.
We need to move beyond these black and white ideas of right and wrong and develop a more nuanced ethical framework for this complex digital world.
So where do we go from here? What are some actionable steps we can take to navigate this digital Wild West responsibly? Welcome back to the show. So we've talked about the heist and the spending spree and how blockchain analysis played a role in catching Malone Lam. But I think there are some bigger takeaways from all of this, especially as cryptocurrency becomes more mainstream.
Yeah, one thing that really stands out to me is just the importance of critical thinking. We're constantly being bombarded with information online, especially in the crypto space, and it's so easy to get caught up in scams or fall for promises that are too good to be true.
Yeah, and with crypto, there's this whole idea of getting rich quick. It's like the new gold rush. And not everyone who's making money is doing it, honestly.
Exactly. It's like the Wild West out there. You have to be
know.
your own sheriff, Do your research, rely on reputable sources, and if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
It's a good reminder that technology, even something as revolutionary as cryptocurrency, is just a tool. And it can be used for good or for bad.
Exactly. And that brings us back to the ethical considerations we were talking about earlier. It's one thing to talk about the legalities of seizing assets, but there's a whole other level of complexity when you think about the ethics of profiting from stolen goods.
Right, like with the model in the Birkin bag, even if she didn't know where the money came from, is it still ethical to accept and flaunt a gift like that?
It's a tough question. There's no easy answer, It really comes down to personal values and where you draw the line.
Sure.
Would you feel comfortable accepting a gift knowing it was bought with stolen money?
I mean, personally, I don't think so.
Mm-hmm.
But it does get murky when you consider the possibility of not knowing the source of the funds, Like, what if she genuinely had no idea?
Right, and that's where the need for transparency comes in. As we move towards a more decentralized financial system, we need better ways to trace assets and make sure people aren't unknowingly benefiting from criminal activity.
So it's not just about protecting ourselves from scams. It's about creating a system where it's harder for people to profit from stolen goods, even if they're not directly involved in the crime.
Exactly. And this case, it's not just about Malone Lam. It's about the bigger picture. It's about the challenges and the opportunities that come with this new digital landscape.
This whole thing has really made me think about the ethical challenges we face in the digital age. It's not just about security. It's about developing a more mindful and responsible approach to our online interactions.
Couldn't agree more. We need to move beyond these simple ideas of right and wrong and develop a more nuanced ethical framework for this complex world.
So where do we go from here? What are some things we can actually do to navigate this digital world responsibly?
Well, it starts with awareness. Just being conscious of the ethical implications of our actions online, even the small things.
Like what?
Like thinking about the source of information before you share it, being skeptical of online offers, and being careful about who you trust.
So it's about being a little bit more like a detective online. Questioning things, verifying information, and really trying to understand the context behind the things we see and do.
Exactly. It's not about being paranoid or distrustful. It's about having a healthy skepticism. And that allows you to engage with the digital world in a more informed and empowered way.
The story of Malone Lam. It's a cautionary tale, for sure. But it's also a reminder that technology can be used for amazing things. It's up to us to shape the future of this digital world and make sure it's a place where innovation can flourish alongside responsibility and ethics.
Well said, and I think that's a perfect note to end on. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I encourage you all to keep learning, keep exploring, and keep asking questions. Be active participants in shaping a better digital future.
And remember, in the digital world, just like in the real world, our actions have consequences. So let's make sure those consequences are positive ones. That's it for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.